The burden of choice. When having it all leaves us empty. Written by Ronnie Rowland. Narrated by Roman Cross. Published by Growth Literacy Lounge. Success is not to be pursued. It is to be attracted by the person you become. Jim Rohn. You've probably felt it. That low, restless hum beneath the surface of your life. It's not exactly burnout. Not quite depression. It's something more elusive. You've done the things you were told would bring fulfillment. You've followed the steps, stayed open to opportunities, maybe even built a life that looks good from the outside. And yet, there's this hollow space that refuses to go away. This book is for that part of you. We live in a world that glorifies having it all. Unlimited options are sold as the ultimate freedom. And yet, in a sea of choices, many of us feel more lost than ever. Overwhelmed. Unanchored. Wondering why the abundance we were promised tastes so thin. When everything is possible, how do you know what's right? When you can be anyone, where do you begin? The Burden of Choice is not a book about doing more. It's not about maximizing your potential or hacking your way to a 5-year plan. It's about pausing the noise long enough to ask better questions. What do you actually want? Not what impresses others. Not what gets applause. But what resonates quietly, deeply, truthfully. This is not a lecture. It's a conversation. A guided return to yourself. We'll explore the ways modern life pulls us in 1,000 directions and how to come home to one. You won't find a rigid formula here. But you will find stories, reflections, and frameworks to help you choose your path with clarity and courage. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to be everything. You just have to begin the work of choosing, on purpose, with presence, and with heart. That work begins now. Chapter 1. The Myth of Having It All. We were told we could have it all. That message rang out like a promise, wrapped in motivation posters, college commencement speeches, and Instagram captions. You can be anything. Do everything. Live without limits. And for a while it felt like freedom. Boundless, thrilling, electric. But freedom without direction is just floating. We live in an era of endless possibility. Swipe through jobs, scroll through soulmates, stream thousands of voices telling us who to become. We've become fluent in options. But somewhere along the way, we lost fluency in desire. Not surface-level want, but deep, bone-level knowing. The kind that doesn't ask, what should I do? But declares, this is who I am. When everything is available, nothing feels right. You open a menu with 100 items and lose your appetite. You stand before an infinite map and feel paralyzed to pick a path. This is the quiet cost of having it all. Not failure, not regret, just the constant, low hum of doubt. The suspicion that no matter what we choose, something better was left behind. It's not just about jobs or relationships. It's a way of moving through life. A hesitancy. A subtle refusal to close doors, as if commitment itself is dangerous. We chase experiences instead of depth. Collect possibilities like souvenirs we never fully unpack. We say yes, then pull back. We half-build 10 bridges and wonder why we're still standing on the edge. There's a reason older generations often seem more grounded. Their paths were fewer, but clearer. You became what your parents were, or you didn't. You married who lived nearby. You worked one job, had one retirement party, told your grandkids the story of how you found your lane and stayed in it. Simpler doesn't mean better, but simplicity brings peace. And we're not peaceful. We've mistaken choice for fulfillment. But fulfillment isn't about access. It's about alignment. You don't find meaning in the number of things you could do. You find it in the one thing you actually do, with heart. Meaning is what forms when attention meets intention. But that's a hard sell today. We're conditioned to believe that narrowing our focus is settling. That saying no to possibilities is weakness. That the more we gather, the more we grow. But growth isn't accumulation. It's deepening, rooting, becoming more of who you are, not more of what the world offers. We're not empty because we lack opportunity. We're empty because we're overloaded with it, and we've never been taught how to choose, how to commit, how to let one door close without standing in the hallway forever, peeking back to make sure we didn't miss something. We think freedom means keeping all options open. But real freedom is the ability to say, this is my path, and I don't need another. What if having it all was never the goal? What if the real prize is knowing what you want deeply enough to ignore the rest? To choose not based on what might impress or protect or distract, but on what truly aligns. What if the life we envy in others isn't built on excess, but on clarity? You don't need more opportunities. You need the courage to walk one path long enough to feel its rhythm, to stop grazing at the buffet of life and finally sit down to eat. Let's be honest, having it all hasn't made us happier. It's made us anxious, restless, afraid to choose, afraid to miss out. But you can't live fully if you're always looking over your shoulder. It's time we challenge the myth. Not to reject freedom, but to redefine it. Not to abandon ambition, but to anchor it. Because meaning doesn't come from everything. It comes from one thing, done well, loved deeply, and chosen on purpose. And that choice? That's where this story begins. Chapter 2. You're not lost, you're drowning. There's a quiet panic that lives just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. It doesn't shout, it hums. A low-frequency static that fills the space between text messages and to-do lists. You feel it when you sit still for too long. When the noise fades and all that's left is you, and the creeping suspicion that you don't know where you're going, or worse, who you are. We call it being lost. We say we're figuring it out, taking time, keeping our options open. But most of the time, we're not lost at all. We're drowning. Drowning in input, in advice, in expectations, in voices pulling us in different directions. Podcasts, mentors, self-help threads, reels about morning routines and million-dollar mindsets. It's not that we're lacking information. We're overloaded with it. The problem isn't that we don't have a compass. It's that we've handed the compass to everyone else, and now we're trying to read it through the crowd. You weren't designed to make 100 decisions a day about who you should be. Your brain, your nervous system, your heart, they weren't built for this kind of chaos. Once upon a time, your choices were shaped by your village. Your role, your rhythms, your rituals. Now, you wake up to 10,000 possible lives staring at you from a screen before you even brush your teeth. This isn't freedom. It's fragmentation. And the worst part? We blame ourselves for feeling overwhelmed. We tell ourselves we should know. We should be further along. We should be confident, decisive, clear. But how can you be clear when you're neck deep in noise? When every choice feels like a risk, and every path not taken haunts your peripheral vision like a ghost of potential. It's no wonder we delay. We postpone commitments, avoid decisions, scroll past anything that feels too final. Because finality feels like a kind of death. And in a world where possibility is the new God, closing a door feels like betrayal. But here's the truth you may have forgotten. Clarity isn't born from more thinking. It's born from less noise. From silence. From presence. From choosing one thing to listen to long enough that it starts to feel like a voice, not just a suggestion. You don't need to figure everything out. You don't need a 5-year plan or the perfect career pivot or a rebrand of your entire life. You need space. You need stillness. You need the courage to quiet the chaos and listen inward, not outward. What if you're not indecisive, but just overloaded? What if your confusion isn't a sign of failure, but a natural response to being constantly bombarded with curated lives and borrowed dreams? What if you're not meant to juggle all these options? What if the peace you crave is on the other side of letting go? We all want to feel anchored, to wake up and know what matters, to move through our days with intention, not reaction. But you don't find anchors by floating endlessly from one idea to the next. You find them by sinking into something real, something yours, and that starts by pulling yourself out of the flood. This isn't a call to shut out the world. It's an invitation to shut out the noise long enough to hear yourself think. Because under all that advice and inspiration and pressure, there's still a quiet part of you that knows, that remembers, that's been trying to get your attention. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're just drowning in too much of everything. And the only way forward isn't to swim faster. It's to stop, breathe, and rise above the water. Chapter 3. The noise in your head isn't all yours. We like to believe our thoughts are our own, that the voices in our head, those constant whispers of doubt, pressure, urgency, are just us, trying to sort life out. But if we really stop and listen, we start to notice something strange. Much of what we hear inside didn't start with us. The noise in your head isn't all yours. You were born into a web of expectations, family hopes, school systems, cultural scripts. Before you even had language, you were absorbing messages about who you should be. Be nice. Be successful. Don't disappoint. Stand out, but don't be too much. Achieve, but stay humble. Follow your dreams, but make sure they pay the bills. We internalize these voices. They become so familiar we mistake them for truth. But they're not truth, they're programming. And most of us never question the source. We just carry the weight. Then came the internet, the algorithm, the endless scroll. We went from village expectations to global comparison in one generation. Now, your brain isn't just managing the opinions of your parents or peers, it's trying to reconcile the curated lives of strangers. People you've never met now live in your head, shaping your desires, your timelines, your self-worth. Their highlight reels become your measuring stick. Their success stories become your standard. It's exhausting. You think you're failing, but really, you're just overwhelmed by a world that's shouting 1,000 definitions of success at once. And every time you try to choose, another voice jumps in. Do more. Be more. Monetize it. Optimize it. Move faster. Be grateful. Be exceptional. Don't waste your potential. No wonder you can't hear yourself. The noise isn't neutral. It pushes. It distorts. It keeps you busy chasing things you never actually chose. That promotion, that relationship, that lifestyle, it might not even be yours. It might just be what you thought you were supposed to want. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is stop chasing long enough to ask, who told me this mattered? Real clarity doesn't come from achieving everything the world says you should. It comes from untangling yourself from the voices that never belonged to you in the first place. That's where the work begins, not in setting bigger goals, but in releasing the ones that aren't yours. Start small. Notice the patterns. When you feel pressure, ask where it's coming from. When you feel behind, ask whose timeline you're on. When you feel unworthy, ask whose definition of success you're using. Slowly, gently, you start to separate your voice from the noise. It takes time. It takes stillness. And it takes brutal honesty. Because sometimes we cling to the noise. It gives us direction, even if it's misaligned. Letting go of it feels like stepping into a void. But that void is where you find your real self, the part of you that existed before the world got loud. There's a voice inside you that's not panicked, not pressured, not trying to prove anything. It's patient. It's rooted. It's been waiting for space to speak. And here's the beautiful truth. You already know what matters to you. Deep down, under all the noise you know, you've just been too busy trying to live up to borrowed stories to let that knowing rise. So this chapter isn't a solution. It's a quiet rebellion. A permission slip to pause, to question, and to notice. Because the most important voice you'll ever learn to trust is the one that's been buried under years of everyone else's. That voice is yours. And it's still there, still strong, still waiting to be heard. Chapter 4. The Village Boy and the Infinite Scroll. In a quiet village, long before screens and pings and algorithms, a boy stood at the edge of two roads. One led to his father's trade, a life of wood, tools, repetition. The other led to the monastery, discipline, silence, devotion. These were the choices. Clear, tangible, known. The boy chose the trade, not because it was easy or even exciting, but because it made sense. It was the right kind of hard. He shaped wood, and in time, a life. There was no question of whether he had missed out. He was too busy living what he chose. Now imagine that boy born today. He wakes up in a world with 1,000 paths. Every day a new possibility, a new niche, a new path to optimize, monetize, personalize. Every scroll brings a different philosophy. One says travel the world. Another says grind until you make it. One tells him to build a brand. Another whispers, simplify, retreat, unplug. He is pulled in every direction and committed to none. He tries everything a little, dips his toe in 10 lives, but he can't shake the sense that something's missing. That boy is us. We live in the era of the infinite scroll. Not just online, but in life. We scroll through jobs, partners, cities, identities. We try on belief systems like outfits. We multitask meaning. And we wonder why we feel disconnected. The problem isn't that we're choosing wrong. It's that we're rarely choosing at all. We're sampling, browsing, hovering above life without sinking into it. Choice has become consumption, but meaning doesn't work like that. You don't build purpose the way you build a playlist. It's not curated, it's cultivated. Slowly, deliberately, with friction and failure and deep roots. The boy in the village didn't live a lesser life because he had fewer options. He lived a fuller one because he gave himself fully to it. We, on the other hand, are often haunted by our options. Obsessed with what might have been, distracted by what still could be. We've confused optionality with identity. There's a cost to living this way, a deep erosion of presence. We're physically in one place, mentally in another, doing one thing while wondering about a dozen others. It's a life of perpetual preview, but nothing changes until we do. Until we stop scrolling and start choosing. Until we stop living like tourists in our own lives and start planting something real. There's no algorithm for fulfillment, no shortcut to depth. You have to walk the path long enough to know its shape. You have to get bored, get frustrated, get tested. That's where richness lives, not in the novelty of new options, but in the intimacy of something chosen, something known. This isn't a call to go back to the village. The world has changed. We're not going to undo the internet or erase the noise. But we can learn to choose differently. To stop letting the scrolls set the rhythm of our lives. To stop believing that more will always feel better. Sometimes, clarity is born not from discovery, but from constraint. Maybe the boy with 2 roads was luckier than we think. Not because his options were better, but because they were few. He didn't spend his life searching for the perfect path. He walked the one he chose and made meaning along the way. Maybe that's the shift we need. Not fewer choices, but more courage to choose. The scroll will always be there, promising something shinier. But life isn't meant to be endlessly browsed. It's meant to be lived, fully, deeply, without the constant fear of missing something better. Because the only thing worse than choosing the wrong path is never choosing one at all. Chapter 5. The Illusion of the Perfect Life. There's a moment, almost every day, when you see it. Sometimes it's on a screen. Sometimes it walks past you on the street. In that person who seems to have figured it out. Their job looks fulfilling. Their relationship seems effortless. Their mornings start with green smoothies and meditation, and their evenings end with laughter and soft lighting. You pause for just a second and wonder, am I doing it wrong? This is the illusion of the perfect life. It sneaks in quietly. You're not consciously comparing. You're just scrolling, observing, breathing in curated stories. But the effect is real. You start to feel off, behind, as if somewhere out there is a version of your life that would finally feel like enough, if only you could find it. We weren't meant to live inside a collage of everyone else's best moments. But now we do. Every hour we're exposed to highlight reels dressed up as reality. We forget that what we see is a sliver. That behind every perfect photo is a sink full of dishes, a missed deadline, a sleepless night. Still, the illusion sticks, and it distorts the way we think about our own path. The perfect life promises certainty. It whispers that if you just pick the right job, the right partner, the right location, everything will click into place. No more doubt, no more longing, just contentment, uninterrupted. But that's not how life works. Even the most aligned path comes with friction. Even the best choices come with cost. Every yes carries 1,000 unseen no's. Chasing the perfect life is like chasing the horizon. It moves as you move. No matter how fast or far you go, it's always just out of reach. And the chase itself becomes exhausting. We delay decisions, not because we don't care, but because we care so much about getting it right. We overanalyze every step, trying to guarantee that we won't regret it later. But perfection isn't a destination. It's a distraction. We've turned life into a puzzle we're trying to solve. Every piece, career, relationship, home, health, must fit together flawlessly. But real life is more like a mosaic. Beautiful, but uneven. Meaningful, but messy. Some pieces break, some never quite fit. And yet, somehow it holds. When you believe in the perfect life, commitment becomes terrifying. Because choosing something means giving up the fantasy that something better might appear. So we stay stuck. We flirt with possibilities, but we don't marry any of them. We become experts at keeping our options open, all while quietly aching for something real. But depth doesn't come from keeping doors open. It comes from walking through one and letting it close behind you. It comes from saying, "This is mine. I choose this." Not because it's perfect, but because it's meaningful. Here's the truth. The most fulfilled people you know aren't the ones who found the perfect life. They're the ones who built an honest one. They chose fully. They stayed when it got hard. They let go of better in theory for richer in practice. They stopped chasing ideal and started cultivating real. There's no formula for a perfect life. There's only the life that unfolds when you stop performing and start participating. When you stop waiting for certainty and begin living with intention. So, what if the goal isn't to find the perfect life, but to stop believing you need one? What if the real path to peace is trading in the chase for presence? For showing up fully, wherever you are, with what you have, and building from there? The perfect life doesn't exist, but a deeply lived one does. And it starts the moment you stop looking for flawless and start choosing what's true. Chapter 6. The Quiet Art of Choosing Deeply. Choosing deeply isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or viral posts. It doesn't trend. It doesn't rush. It whispers. It waits. It's a quiet art in a world obsessed with speed and spectacle. But it's also the only way to live a life that actually feels like yours. We've been taught to chase what's impressive. Degrees, titles, follower counts. The shiny markers of a life that looks successful from the outside. And in that chase, we often forget to ask the harder question, does this resonate? Not just look good or pay well or make sense on paper, but does it feel true in my bones? Choosing deeply isn't about perfection. It's about alignment. It's recognizing the difference between what's appealing and what's meant for you. That difference is subtle, and the world rarely rewards it. But your soul does. You feel it in your chest, in your gut, in the way certain choices bring peace, even if they bring challenge too. Most of us live at the surface of things. We dabble, try a bit of this, a bit of that. We hedge our bets, keep our hearts guarded, our options open. We say, let's see how it goes, and never really commit. But depth doesn't happen by accident. It's cultivated, chosen, watered slowly over time. Think of relationships. You can date dozens of people, skim the surface, trade chemistry for consistency. Or you can choose one and go deep, through the boring days, the arguments, the silent mornings, through the work. That's where intimacy lives, not in the spark, but in the staying. The same is true of callings. You can try every side hustle, follow every trend, optimize for what's popular. Or you can choose a craft, one that speaks to you, one that might not look impressive for a while, one that asks something of you. You learn to love its nuances. You master its language, and in doing so, it shapes you. Choosing deeply means staying when it stops being exciting, when the novelty fades and the real work begins, when you're tempted to look elsewhere. That's the moment most people leave. But that's also the doorway to meaning, because depth is forged, not found. There's risk, of course. Choosing deeply means letting go of other paths, saying no to possibilities. That can feel like loss, like giving up on potential. But there's a different kind of loss that comes from never committing. A subtle grief, the ache of almost living. When you choose deeply, you move from curiosity to conviction. From I might try this to this is mine. That shift changes everything. It changes how you show up, how you invest, how you grow, and most importantly, how fulfilled you feel, even when the path is hard. We live in a world that tells us to stay light, to pivot fast, to keep moving. But sometimes the most radical act is to stay, to choose something, someone, somewhere, some path, and keep choosing it. Not blindly, not out of fear, but with eyes open and heart in. This isn't about settling. Settling is staying out of fear. Choosing deeply is staying out of love, out of purpose, out of trust that there's something worthwhile on the other side of persistence. So ask yourself, what would it look like to choose deeply right now? In your work, your relationships, your habits? What are you skimming that you could sink into? Life isn't about sampling everything. It's about building something. That takes presence, that takes patience. And most of all, it takes a decision, not just once, but again and again. Depth doesn't shout. But if you listen closely, it's always calling. Chapter 7. Freedom through limits. It sounds like a contradiction. Freedom through limits. We've been taught that freedom is the absence of restriction. That to be free is to have no boundaries, no ceilings, no rules. But real freedom doesn't come from having every door open. It comes from having the clarity and courage to walk through one and close it behind you. We're told to leave our options open, as if options themselves are the goal. But open options are just potential. And potential, when unchosen, becomes pressure. Every unmade decision hangs in the air like a weight. Every possible path becomes a ghost tugging at your attention. And soon you're spread so thin trying to be everything that you end up being nothing fully. There's a strange kind of peace that only shows up after a decision is made. When the what-ifs quiet down. When your energy stops leaking into hypotheticals. That's when momentum begins. That's when you can finally build something. Limits don't trap you. They focus you. They're not cages, they're containers. And inside the right container, something meaningful can grow. Think about art. A blank canvas with infinite space isn't liberating, it's paralyzing. But give the artist dimensions, and something beautiful emerges. A haiku has more rules than a rambling paragraph, yet within those lines, poets find magic. Musicians work within scales. Architects work within blueprints. Every creative act is born from limitation. And so is a life worth living. The same is true in relationships. Total freedom, keeping every door open, every option alive, doesn't lead to intimacy. It leads to detachment. But choose one person. Close every other door. Bring your full self into that bond. Suddenly, depth appears. Trust builds. Love roots itself. Not because you could have had anyone, but because you chose someone fully. We fear limitation because we confuse it with scarcity. But limits are not lack. They're structure. Without them, nothing holds. Without them, we're just floating, forever looking, never landing. It's why so many of us feel restless, even while surrounded by opportunity. Because opportunity without direction is just noise. There's also a strange relief in knowing your boundaries. In choosing what you're not going to pursue. It's not giving up. It's growing up. It's the maturity to say, this isn't for me, and that's okay. It's permission to trade breadth for depth. To stop collecting experiences like souvenirs and start living one experience with presence and devotion. Limits also reveal what you truly value. When you can't do it all, you're forced to ask, what matters most? And that question has power. It cuts through ego, distraction, and fear. It brings you back to your center. And from that place, your choices become clearer. In a culture obsessed with more experiences, more goals, more exposure, choosing limits can feel rebellious. But maybe rebellion is exactly what we need. Not against society, but against our own addiction to endlessness. Because freedom without grounding is just spinning. Imagine a tree trying to grow without roots, reaching outward in every direction, but never downward. It would look busy, maybe even impressive. But eventually, it would topple. Because without roots, nothing stands. Limits are your roots. The commitments you make. The things you say yes to, and mean it. The things you say no to, and don't second guess. That's where your freedom begins. Not in doing everything, but in doing something deeply with all of you. So if you feel scattered, overwhelmed, untethered, it might be time to draw a few lines. Not to shrink your life, but to give it shape, to stop floating and start building. Not a perfect life, but a real one. And that, in the end, is the only kind of freedom worth chasing. Chapter 8. A Framework for Clarity. Clarity isn't a lightning bolt, it's a practice. We wait for some divine moment where everything clicks, where the fog lifts and the path is perfectly lit. But in real life, clarity doesn't shout. It unfolds. Slowly, quietly. It's not something you find. It's something you build. In a world full of noise, you need tools to tune in. Not just more thinking, but better thinking. A process that helps you sort signal from static. Not to figure everything out at once, but to take one honest step at a time. That's what a framework is for. Not to box you in, but to bring you back to yourself when the world tries to pull you in every direction. Start with resonance. That's the first filter. Before you overanalyze or crowdsource a decision, ask, does this feel like me? Not, is this impressive? Not, would this make sense to other people? But does something in me light up when I think about this? Resonance doesn't always look logical. Sometimes it looks risky. But it's your inner compass trying to speak. The hard part is trusting it before the world confirms it. Next, look at friction. Every choice comes with it. But there's a difference between the friction of growth and the friction of misalignment. One stretches you. The other drains you. One feels like resistance that sharpens. The other feels like resistance that suffocates. Pay attention. The right path isn't always easy, but it has a kind of rightness to its difficulty. It demands effort, not self-betrayal. Then there's energy. The best way to measure a decision is to check how it affects your energy over time. Not just in the moment, but across weeks and months. Does this choice fuel you? Does it make you more present, more alive, more grounded? Or does it leave you scattered and small? We often underestimate how much our environments, commitments, and people either feed or drain our energy. But energy is truth. It rarely lies. Finally, consider consistency, not perfection, but pattern. Is this choice aligned with who you've been becoming? Does it match what you've cared about, what you've returned to, what keeps showing up in your life? The world changes fast, and so do we. But there's often a thread running through our lives if we're willing to trace it. Clarity doesn't come from inventing a brand new self. It comes from recognizing the self that's already there, quietly repeating herself. Resonance, friction, energy, consistency. These aren't checkboxes, they're mirrors. You don't need to apply them like a machine. You feel your way through them. You notice. You reflect. And over time, the static starts to clear. Clarity isn't about finding the perfect answer. It's about learning to trust your process. It's about building enough self-awareness to move with intention instead of impulse. Enough courage to choose something, not because it's guaranteed, but because it's grounded in who you are. You don't need more advice. You don't need another list of 10 rules for success. What you need is space and honesty and a few solid tools that help you listen to yourself beneath the noise. That's what this framework offers, not certainty, but direction, not control, but clarity. We keep waiting for life to get quieter so we can hear ourselves think. But the noise isn't going away, so we learn to listen differently, to filter better, to anchor deeper. That's how you stop spinning. That's how you start walking, not with a map, but with a compass. And the more you follow that compass, the more your life starts to feel less like a maze and more like a home. Chapter 9. Courage over comfort. And clarity is only the beginning. Once you know what feels right, the real challenge begins, choosing it fully. Not in theory, not as a future plan, but right now. And that moment, the moment of actual choice, is where most of us hesitate. Because clarity demands courage, and courage always costs comfort. We want transformation without tension. We want to change our lives without disrupting them. But the truth is, choosing what truly aligns with us almost always means stepping away from something familiar. A job that's safe but soul-numbing. A relationship that's steady but misaligned. A version of ourselves that others accept but no longer feels real. That's the price of a meaningful life, letting go of what no longer fits. It's tempting to stay in the middle, or to hover between options, to talk about the thing we want without fully committing. It feels safer there. You get the illusion of progress without the risk of failure. But nothing meaningful happens in the middle. It's a holding pattern, a quiet stall, and eventually it turns into resentment. Resentment toward the people you're trying to please, toward the systems you feel stuck in. But mostly, resentment toward yourself for not being braver. Courage doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like saying no to a path everyone else is applauding. Sometimes it looks like starting small, quietly, when no one is watching. Sometimes it looks like telling the truth to someone else or just to yourself. But it always feels the same. Like risk, like exposure, like standing on the edge of something with no guarantee it'll work. That fear is normal. It's human. Your brain is wired to protect you from uncertainty. It interprets change as danger. That's not weakness, it's biology. But you're not just biology. You get to choose differently. You get to decide that discomfort is not a stop sign, but a signal. A sign that you're on the edge of something real. The life you want, the one that's aligned, honest, deeply yours, sits on the other side of a door that only opens when you lean in. You can't think your way through that door. You have to walk through it. One shaky, honest step at a time. Sometimes that step is external. A decision, a conversation, a leap. Other times it's internal. A belief you shed, a story you stop telling, a part of yourself you finally let come forward. But it always takes courage, because real alignment disrupts the false peace of fitting in. You won't always be ready. That's a myth. Readiness is a feeling that follows action, not one that leads it. You act first, then your nervous system catches up. Waiting to feel perfectly brave before you move will keep you frozen. But moving in the presence of fear, that's courage, and it builds. Every time you choose what matters over what's easy, you reinforce a new pattern. You start to trust yourself. You start to feel different in your own skin. This isn't about being reckless. It's about being honest, about choosing discomfort with direction over comfort with confusion. Because staying comfortable in a life that isn't yours isn't peace, it's paralysis. So ask yourself, what would I do if I stopped trying to avoid fear? What would I choose if I trusted that discomfort was a doorway, not a danger? What if the shaking in my chest is just my soul stretching into a life that fits? Courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you choose anyway, not because the path is clear, but because your heart is. And that's enough. Chapter 10. The beauty of missing out. We've been conditioned to fear missing out. Every time we say no, there's a whisper in the back of our minds, what if this was the one? The one opportunity, the one relationship, the one breakthrough. So we keep our calendars full, our inboxes open, our eyes on the feed, just in case. We don't want to miss anything. But in trying to be everywhere, we end up being nowhere fully. There's another way to live, a quieter way. One that doesn't chase every invitation, every trend, every signal that we might be falling behind. It's not about scarcity, it's about presence. It's not about lack. It's about depth, and it starts with embracing the beauty of missing out. We don't talk much about that beauty. We talk about saying yes, about leaning in, about maximizing. But every meaningful yes demands 1,000 quiet no's. You can't be all in and still have one foot out the door. You can't create a deep, rooted life if you're constantly wondering what else is out there. Missing out isn't failure, it's focus. It means you're choosing, you're aligning. You're letting the noise pass you by so you can hear what matters. The people who are most at peace aren't the ones with the most access. They're the ones with the most intention. They've decided what matters to them, and they've built their lives around that. Not perfectly, not without sacrifice, but on purpose. The fear of missing out comes from the illusion that life is happening somewhere else. That meaning is always just around the corner, in the next event, the next connection, the next big thing. But real life isn't found in more. It's found in noticing what's already here, in showing up to it, in participating, not just watching. There's joy in narrowing your world, in turning off notifications and tuning in to a smaller circle of people, ideas, and practices. There's something sacred about choosing a path and letting go of all the ones you didn't take. Not because they weren't worthy, but because you can only walk one road at a time. And if you're constantly glancing sideways, you'll miss what's right in front of you. We forget that every path has its own magic. We think the one we didn't choose would have been better, easier, shinier. But that's fantasy. The path you're on, the one you committed to, holds its own rewards. But you have to stay long enough to find them. And that means missing out on other roads. That means turning down something good because you're building something better, something aligned, something lasting. There's a deep confidence that grows in people who no longer chase every option. You can feel it in their presence. They're not frantic. They're not scanning the room. They're there, fully. Not because they've settled, but because they've chosen. And that choice gives them a grounded kind of freedom. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. Missing out isn't always comfortable. There will be twinges of curiosity, waves of doubt. You'll wonder if you made the right call. That's normal. But over time, those doubts give way to peace. You begin to trust that the life you're building has its own gravity, its own rhythm, and that what's meant for you won't require you to be everything, everywhere, all at once. So here's the invitation. Let some things go. Let them pass by without needing to chase or compare. Choose what matters most and let the rest be background noise. Because in missing out on the noise, you make space for the music. And in that space, you don't feel like you're missing anything at all. Chapter 11. A new definition of success. Success used to be simpler. It was a stable job, a house, maybe a family. You worked hard, kept your head down, and built a life that looked like everyone else's. But at least it had structure. At least it had an endpoint. Now, success is a moving target. It changes depending on who you ask, what day it is, or which influencer posted last. And for all our progress, we're more anxious than ever about whether we measure up. We don't just want to succeed, we want to succeed in every category. Career, finances, health, relationships, hobbies, travel, appearance, mindset, morning routines, social impact. We're not building lives, we're curating performances. And deep down, we know it's unsustainable. But we're afraid that if we slow down, if we stop optimizing, we'll fall behind in a race we never consciously chose to enter. Maybe the problem isn't us. Maybe it's the definition. What if success isn't about accumulation? Not about more achievements, more followers, more experiences. What if it's about alignment? About knowing who you are and living in a way that honors that. About waking up and liking the person you see in the mirror, not because they're perfect, but because they're true. Success has become externalized. It lives in numbers, in recognition, in validation from people we may never meet. But real success is internal. It's quiet. It's the peace that comes from making decisions you respect. It's the integrity of walking a path that reflects your actual values, not just your inherited ones. We rarely ask what success feels like. We focus on what it looks like, but the most beautiful lives often don't photograph well. They're not flashy. They're not built for attention. They're built for meaning. They're full of small, intentional choices that add up to something steady and rich. Not loud, but lasting. You can redefine success anytime you want. You don't need permission. You don't need a plan. You just need to start asking better questions. What matters most to me, not just in theory, but in practice? When do I feel most alive? What am I doing when I feel grounded, clear, honest? These questions are simple, but they're not easy. Because they peel away layers of expectation and expose what's real. Redefining success means grieving a little. You'll have to let go of identities that earned you praise. You'll have to admit that some of the goals you chased were never really yours. That hurts. But on the other side of that grief is a freedom most people never taste. The freedom to live a life that doesn't need applause to feel meaningful. This new definition of success isn't about shrinking. It's about centering. It's not anti-ambition. It's about the right kind of ambition with roots. Not just to go far, but to go deep. Not just to rise, but to rise in the direction of who you really are. There will still be days when you compare, when old metrics creep back in. That's okay. You're rewiring a lifetime of conditioning. It takes time. But little by little, your compass shifts. You stop asking, "How do I look?" and start asking, "How does this feel?" You stop needing everyone to understand your choices, because you finally do. And when you live that way, something powerful happens. Peace takes the place of pressure. Joy replaces performance. And your life, imperfect, quiet, maybe even small, starts to feel like a success you'd actually want to keep. Not because it checked all the boxes, but because it came from you. Chapter 12. Your turn. You've read the pages. Sat with the stories. Let the questions sink in. Maybe something inside you stirred a sense of recognition. A quiet yes, a gentle ache for something simpler, truer, more grounded. That's not an accident. That's your life speaking. And now, it's your turn to answer. This isn't the part where you map out a 5-year plan or overhaul everything overnight. That's not the invitation. The invitation is much smaller, but more powerful. Choose one thing. One part of your life where you've been drifting, performing, second-guessing. One place where the noise has been louder than your knowing. And make a choice, not a perfect one, not a flashy one, just a real one. We spend so much time thinking about who we might become. We dream, we plan, we delay. But the person you're meant to be doesn't show up one day with certainty and fanfare. They emerge in the quiet moments, in the decision to stay when it's hard, and to leave when it no longer fits, to speak up when it matters, to act, even when you're scared. Your life is built in these small pivots, these honest yeses, these courageous no's. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to start acting in alignment with what you already know deep down. Maybe it's time to commit to the work that calls you, even if no one else gets it. Maybe it's time to walk away from something that once made sense but now feels hollow. Maybe it's time to say, "This is enough," and actually mean it. Or maybe it's just time to pause, to sit in stillness, to listen, not for more advice, but for your own voice, the one that's been waiting for space to speak. You won't do this perfectly. No one does. You'll make choices that lead to dead ends. You'll question yourself. You'll want to retreat into the safety of indecision. That's normal. Growth is messy. But every time you choose with intention, every time you align your outer life with your inner truth, something powerful happens. You trust yourself a little more. You stand a little taller. You begin to believe that you're capable of building a life you don't need to escape. That belief is everything, because the world will keep trying to pull you off course. It will dangle distractions. It will push you to prove, to compare, to perform. But now you know better. You know that more isn't always better. That clarity feels different than approval. That peace doesn't come from having all the options. It comes from honoring the few that truly matter. So here's your final challenge. Don't just finish this book. Live it. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Choose depth over breadth, presence over perfection, meaning over more. Choose to be the kind of person who doesn't need every path, just the right one. The one that aligns. The one that feels like home. Your life won't become perfect, but it will become yours. And that's enough. If you need a place to begin, start here. What is one thing you know you need to do, and what would it look like to finally do it? Write it down, say it out loud, share it with someone. Then take one small step in that direction. That's how the shift begins. Not with noise, not with fanfare, but with one clear, honest move. You're not waiting anymore. You're choosing. And that changes everything. Take care and be well.